Ciao, signor and signori. How's it going? Screezilla here. Sorry for my terrible Italian. So, yesterday for me, last night for you, this morning for some of you, I guess, we got the announcement that the Italian tech tree is coming. So, today we're talking about the Regia Aeronautica. With the announcement from Gaijin that the Italian Air Force is in patch 1.69 for War Thunder, now we'll get into a little bit of time of what could be planes that we could get. A little bit like the cruiser video I did, a bit of speculation on this thing just before the release, sort of things that we could well be getting for the Italian Air Force. We already know a few planes that are going to be in there, and with the announcement we also got to look at some of the premium planes. There will be a few more premium planes. There's probably going to be a premium Spitfire. There'll probably be a premium Mustang, things like that. Because once after 1939, the Italian Air Force even received things like the Liberator and stuff like that. So there's chance of some interesting planes in that regard. One of the weird things for Italy is going to be how they're going to fight. So, being that Italy in the early wars fought with the Germans, of course, so early game, so up to about BR4, say, tier 4, you're going to be fighting with the Germans. After that, could you be fighting with the Allies? Or are they going to keep it strictly Axis power, Allied power, and then Tier 5 have it against Russians and things like that? Little weird bits like that in there. But it's something they could do. And I'm having to think about it. With the Italians in the game, we're surely going to get the French next. So, with the French as well, there's that option of having them maybe Tier 1 fighting for the Allies, Tier 2, Tier 3 fighting for both Allies and Germany, because you've got the Vichy France as well. So you've got the French fighting for the Germans, and you've also got the French fighting for the Allies. So there's some really cool little options you could have in that respect. And then, of course, the late game, it will basically be Allies versus communist countries, and of course that's just Russia, isn't it, really? So the USSR, which is pretty much what we have now, although we will still have, of course, Germany, Japan, Italy working together, and then Britain, America and Russia working together in some games. But it gives a more broad spectrum for matchmaking, game starts, things like that. Now, as you see here in the background, I've got a video playing of a game I had today, just taking up the MC2002, I think it was, or 202. Don't know why I keep adding zeros to things. I've been looking at so many Italian planes today, my brain is fried. So a little bit of gameplay in the background, so it's not too boring while I talk about this. So now I'll try to keep this brief. Although, as we saw with the cruiser one, yeah, it didn't end up that brief, did it? But I'll try not to make it go on too long, and I won't get into too much. So a little brief history on the Italian Air Force. Although the French were the first to make an Air Force, the Italians were the first to actually fly a military flight, with a reconnaissance flight in 1911, and the first ever bombing raid later that year in November. At the outbreak of the Second World War, the Italians had a relatively weak air force compared to other Axis nations due to their obsolete production methods. However, they still had a strong air force. One of the things that hampered the Italians was the poor use of their air power. Much like the French, they had the equipment to beat Germany. The Italians had the equipment to beat England in Africa, but they just didn't have the leadership. They were still fighting wars 10 years in the past, 20 years in the past, They weren't fighting a mobile war, they were fighting an entrenched warfare. And that worked great in places like the Alps and stuff. They had great success in those places where there was relatively little movement. But when it came to large open plains, they really suffered. Much like the French, the Italians got their asses handed to them a lot of time in large open battles, just because the leaders weren't really great at doing much in those sort of areas. It was a bit of a leadership failure. Also, I wanted to just mention before we continue, I really do expect Germany to get some new planes. Maybe not with this exact patch, but the next one. They're going to be getting some low BR fighters to take out because the Italian fighters are leaving their tech tree. I also expect them to get some bombers as well. So we could be in for some new German bombers as well, which is going to be interesting. At last, we've been asking for them for a while. But the other interesting thing is float planes. Now, Germany had quite a good float plane, Kriegsmarine Air Force. I think we're going to get a lot more naval planes in play before the naval battles Knights of the Sea is released. So I do foresee us getting some more naval technology for planes. And we've already got a few float planes, but I foresee a fair few more coming out in the future. Especially with Germany. So expect them to get a naval line. They did have planes capable of aircraft carrier launch. They had planes that were capable of being launched off of rams with floats on, of course, as well. They were working on the Graf Zeppelin by the end of the war, and with that they were working on planes capable of taking off from aircraft carriers and landing on them, so they do have that capability. And I foresee a few planes coming into action that have more naval capability than we currently have. Now, let us chat about the Italian planes. I'll list what we have quickly and then go into a small amount of detail for what is coming and possibly coming up. So, at the moment, we have things like the CR42, the G50 and G57 series, the MC200 3 series and 7 series, as well as the MC202, and of course we have the MC79 and 80, the fantastic tri-engine and the Romanian twin-engined bombers made of matchsticks. So expect them to go into the Italian tech tree and be removed from the German tech tree. Although the MC80 may well remain, the SM. Why am I saying SM 79 and 80? As I said, I've been looking at a lot of Italian planes today, and my brain is absolutely fried. So the SM 79 and 80, sorry. Now, you may still see a couple of those in the German tech tree. I'd probably say the 80 will remain there as a Romanian plane, because I can't foresee Romania getting their own tech tree anytime soon. But maybe they'll build a German allied countries tech tree later down the line in the long, long future, much like a Commonwealth tech tree could come for things like Australia and India and New Zealand, things like that. Could be an interesting little branch. So, we shall start with some speculation and a look at what we're going to be getting. So there's a few that are locked in. Let us look at some possible planes we will see now for the fighters. So, the first one is the Fiat CR32 bis. Now this is the premium planes that have been announced today. So this is what you're looking at now on screen. So the Fiat CR32 bis was the most widely used plane in the Spanish Civil War. A great plane from the 30s with twin 7.7mm and 12.7mm machine guns. This was a pretty brutal little plane. Very turny, very good at turning. Has the small quarter bottom wing and the larger top wing, which gives it a much better turn rate, things like that. It has very, very good lift coefficient and things like that. Not very powerful, not very fast, but it will turn on a dime, and it will shred things to crap with those machine guns. Having the 50 cals on it at tier 1 is going to make a big difference. The fact it has 4 machine guns, it's going to be a bit of a beast to deal with. I do expect us to get the standard CR32, just with twin 7.7mm as well, as probably the standard plane, the starter plane to say. Much like, this will be comparable to the CR42 Premium, which I as well will go to the the Italian line. Next up, we have the Fiat G55S, a variant of the G55 monoplane fighter. This plane lost its heavy nose-mounted machine guns to have a torpedo mount in its place. It comes with 3 20mm cannons, 2 in the wing, 1 in the nose, through the engine. The plane is comparable to a BF-109 and the North American P-51 Mustang, D variant. We will likely see the G55 0 series and 1 series. The 0 had 1 20mm and 4 12.7mm machine guns. The series 1 had 3 20mm and 2 12.7mm machine guns. Pilots adored this plane. It was good at high altitude and low altitude, had a beefy engine, and was very manoeuvrable. This plane, I can foresee being a bit of a good plane. People are going to like it. It's going to surprise a lot of people. It's going to be very similar to a BF-109, really. Very sleek design, though, so it's very slippery through the air, and this is something a lot of Italian planes tend to have. So, let's move on to some speculation. Now, I will apologise in advance for all the mispronunciations I make in this video. Be prepared for many of them. So let's start with the Ambrosini SAI 207. Possible plane to come. This was a racing plane pre-war and designed as a light fighter. Although levelled flight with this plane was incredibly fast, this plane was fast as in a straight line. Generally at sea level, it was not the best at climbing. It was terrible at climbing, and it was very lightweight. It was made of wood. The frame was all wooden, and I believe it had a mostly metal skin, but it also had some cloth on there as well. The fighting variant only had 2 12.7mm machine guns. It couldn't have any more than that due to the recoil causing issues with the plane handling. So that could be an interesting plane that we get. It's going to be very fast at low tier, but it's not going to have the machine gun power of most planes. Also stability and climbing ability. It's more of a boom and zoom, but you're not going to be able to out-climb people. It's a bit of a weird one. So next up, we have the Caproni Visola F5. And this was a radial engine plane with a single-seater fighter with twin 12.7mm machine guns. As you can see, it looks a little bit like a Focke-Wulf 190, a little bit, but it's an older design. It could be an interesting plane that we get, probably a low BR plane as well. Next we come to planes that we're going to see later in the BR. These are probably going to be around about 3 to 4.0, maybe 5.0 BR. The MC205, regarded by most as the best Italian plane of the war, or best Italian fighter of the war, along with being a very speedy plane, capable of up to 400 miles per hour, 640 kilometers per hour, included a great set of guns, twin 12.7mm and twin 20mm guns, and capable of carrying up to 350 pounds of bomb. I would say this one's a definite. This one's locked in. This is going to be a plane that we're going to get. It's a very pretty plane. It does look a lot like the 202, So a little bit different in some of the areas, but a very similar plane to its handling, but just a ton more firepower. Next up, we have the Regia RE2005, another great fighter, although it did have a big weakness in the tail section. It wasn't really ironed out before the armistice, so this plane really didn't get full use, but it did end up going to Germany and fighting on there until the end of the war. The Germans used this plane until the last days of the war. It was flying over Berlin as Berlin was in flames. Pilots respected it and really did enjoy it after the tail was worked out, and had a really good speed and climb rate, mainly due to the sleek design and the fantastic DB605 engine it carried. It had twin 12.7mm and three 20mm guns on board, and could carry up to 1,000 kilograms of bombs. So pretty heavy duty fighter plane, this one. I'd say this is probably going to be sort of the equivalent to the TA. So a late tier fighter. So probably one of the last fighters you'll get before jets. And I will talk about jets at the end. Now, another thing, just before I continue, this is all working off of data and planes from before the armistice. I'm not looking at planes after 43. So it's basically 43 to prior. Now, there weren't many Italian planes made after the peace treaty was signed, for one thing, and a lot of the planes they used were planes from other nations. So they used things like the Hurricane, the Spitfire, the Mustang, as I said before, the Liberator, things like that. So a lot of Allied planes they had at this period. So I'm looking at the true Italian planes, the things that they designed and built and had for themselves. So next up, we're going to be looking at heavy fighters. So an obvious one first, the most famous failure of the war. This one is a much loved plane, but one that was really not very good. Well, it was. That's the crazy thing about this plane. It was basically the Mosquito of its day. In the late 30s, this thing was the fastest twin-engine plane there was. It was a racing plane. This thing was amazing. Performed well. It blew everybody away. But as soon as you put extra weight on it, it was terrible. So of course I'm talking about the Breda BA-88. With no equipment on board, it was possibly one of the best twin-engine heavy fighters of all time, along with being one of the fastest. However, as soon as even guns were mounted, the plane was a dog, ending up as a decoy on airfields. So basically at the towards the middle of 42, even 41 actually, they just started using these as planes they would leave on an airfield just to get shot at and bombed. They would put them on airfields that weren't in use and just leave them there so Allied planes would attack them. They were just decoys. A real sad thing about this plane. It had so much potential. Now let's talk about armament. So it had 4 12.7mm machine guns in the nose and a 7.7mm in the back. It was capable of carrying up to 1,000 kilograms of bombs. As I say, on paper capable of doing that. And it could do it, but it just wasn't very good at it. Okay, moving swiftly on. Now, this one, you may raise an eyebrow for a heavy fighter, but that's generally what it was used as. The Caproni CA 331B, a very light bomber and mainly used as a night fighter. This plane is similar to the HE-111 in looks. It was often used as a night fighter, as I said. It's quite a pretty little plane. It's like a smaller Heinkel 111. Has 2 12.7mm machine guns, 4 20mm. Could carry up to 6 20mm. It could carry up to 6 20mm in a bulge under the plane, and it had the capability of carrying up to about 240 pounds of bombs. But mainly this thing was used to shred people at night, shred bombers, things like that. a bit of a bomber hunter. Next up, now these two are both concept planes more than anything, so not too sure if they will come in, but they're both good options to have. So we'll start with the Sevilla Machete, the SM-88. Although only one of these planes was built, I can see them being added just because, well, there's not much option for heavy fighters / attackers for the Italians. So I can see them using more paper planes or single prototype planes in the main building of the trees. So it's similar in looks to the Focke-Wulf Night Owl, the Focke-Wulf 189 or Night Eagle. The SM-88 was a wooden plane with metal skin, designed as a heavy multi-role fighter. It carried 3 12.7mm machine guns and could be armed with up to 1,300 pounds of bombs. So a reasonably good little plane. It doesn't have a rear gun, it just has forward-facing guns. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it only has the forward-facing guns in its current configuration that we're looking at there. I believe there was one with a 7.7mm at the back as well, for the navigator to use in an emergency. But from the front, this thing is very similar to the BF-110, and that's what it was designed after. Next up, we have the Savio Machete SM-92, a variant of the 88. This removed the central position for the pilot and the gunner, and instead had them sitting on the right-hand side. Similar in looks to the P-82E Mustang, the SM-92 had a much heavier armament than the 88, with 3 20mm and 3 12.7mm machine guns, and the ability to take almost 4,500 pounds of bombs on board. Because it removed the central point for the pilots, it had a lot more lift, and, well, it was a lot lighter than it was before, so it could have a lot more armament on board. Both of these planes existed. As you can see, we've got the photo of the SM-92 here. I didn't actually get the SM-88 photo because there was none that really showed it off very well, so it's more of a model for that one. But as you can see, it's an interesting looking plane, and I can see it coming into War Thunder as something different and something that could be used. Interestingly, this plane was taken by the Germans to be developed after 1933, so it does have German markings on it, but it is a Spanish plane, an Italian plane. I keep saying Spanish, for God's sake. Sorry about that. So anyway, moving on. So now we're going to be looking at the Maritime Regia Marina. So basically the naval wing. As I said before, I got a feeling that with the CBT naval battles in the works, all nations will see an increase in float planes for the barracks. Italy had some great float planes in their naval air wing, so here are a couple we may see, if not on release, in the near future. So we'll start off with the Kant Z506, or the Heron as it was called. A plane similar in looks to the SM-79. I wrote SM-79 there, but MC up at the top. I don't know what my brain was thinking. So anyway, plane in similar looks to the SM-79. The Z506 was a fantastic seaplane and light to medium bomber, along with having a long role as a search and rescue plane for the Italian Navy, being used until 1959. So a pretty long record. It was actually built in about the 30s, I believe. So this thing is a pretty long-lasting plane. The pilots adored this plane. It was very easy to fly, very sturdy, took a lot of damage, could carry quite a lot of bombs, and was just a really good search and rescue plane. It also could take off in rough weather as well. With the twin floats, it was very sturdy on rough seas, so it could take off no matter the weather, which was a big thing for seaplanes. So this could carry one 800 kilogram torpedo, or 1,200 kilograms of bombs. It had one 12.7mm machine gun and three 7.7mm machine guns, all darted around. It had a top and bottom point for guns, and also side points, and I think it had a front gun as well. Onwards we go. Now you'll be looking at this and thinking, well, that's a Catalina. Nope, it's not. This is the Cant Z501 Gull. It is very similar to the Catalina, but it only has one engine, a single engine mounted above the cockpit. The Gull was outdated in 1940, but carried on in service until 49. It did suffer heavy losses, but in its day it was a record-breaking plane for distance. This thing flew from Italy to America many times. It set many records for it. So I can see this being a very early tier bomber. So it carried up to 640 kilograms of bombs, not a huge amount, but enough to cause some damage. And it had three 7.7mm machine guns for defence. So it's not nearly as menacing as the Catalina is, but kind of like a baby Catalina. That's what it looks like anyway. And last but not least for the seaplanes, a bit of a different one. The Savio Machetti S55. Now this one is an interesting one, and I really do hope we get it. Something I can see War Thunder putting in the game because it is an interesting plane. It may well go in as a premium, although it was used more than a lot of the planes I've mentioned until this point. So it was a double-hulled flying boat introduced in 1924. It set records of speed, distance, payload at the time. Although this plane has a small footnote in the history of the Second World War, I can see it being added just for the oddity factor. It did do quite a bit in the Second World War. It did have quite a lot of action involved in it, mainly delivering things though, but it was used as a bomber and a torpedo plane as well. It carried one 800 kilogram torpedo, could carry up to 2,000 kilograms of bombs, and it had four 7.7mm machine guns for defence. And as you see, it's just a really weird looking plane. It looks like two boots to me. So I really do hope we get this, because it's just so bizarre. It looks awesome. Okay, onwards and upwards we go. So next on, we will look at the attackers and dive bombers. Now this was a tricky one for me because, well, really, other than some of the heavy fighters I've mentioned before being used in ground attack roles, well, there was only one attacker made for Italy. There were a few put down on paper, there were a few prototypes made, but there was only one plane used in an attacking role, and that was the Regia BA-65. It was an evolution of the BA-64, which we may be getting in game. That might be a plane that they put in as well, which itself was worked off the BA-27 fighter, which again could see being put in game, possibly as a tier 1 fighter. The BA-65 was the only Italian ground attack aircraft to see action in its intended role during the war, and it saw service exclusively in North Africa. It was intended as a fighter attacker, but it was cumbersome in air combat, and thus it went to the second role of attacking and ground pounding positions. It was reasonably successful at that because it had some decent weaponry. It had it had twin 12.7mm machine guns and twin 7.7mm machine guns in the front, in the wing. It didn't have a rear gunner. It was a single pilot plane, so that was one of the big things that hindered it, because there was no defence gunning on it. But it did carry up to 500 kilograms of bombs, so a fair amount of load. It's a pretty outdated plane though. It's going to be a tier 1 for sure if it does come in, but being that it was Italy's only attacker, then it has to be in the game. Next up, we'll be looking at the BA-201, the Italian Stuka. Now, this is a tale of what could have been. This is a bit of a paper plane. but as you can see, it did have a prototype made and was flown. I can see it being used in low BR. I can't see it being more than a 2.0. So it was a single seat plane with a gull wing design, similar to that of the Stuka. The BA-201 was to be the Italian dive bomber of choice. However, by the time the prototype was made up, it was outmatched by the German Ju-87D, and thus given up on. Because, well, the Ju-87 was far superior to it, and the Germans just let the Italians have some of those, save them money on developing a new aircraft. The other thing was it only had a single person on the plane, so it didn't have any defence from the rear. Again, a big deciding factor. So this plane had two 12.7mm machine guns, and it carried up to 500 kilograms of bombs. Next up, we are looking at the Cansa, C-A-N-S-A, FC-12 fighter attacker plane. Now this one was crewed by 2 people. This plane only saw 12 models made, and none were configured to the dive bombing role it was foreseen as. They were only sort of configured to ground attacking at low altitude and possibly being a fighter. It did not see any combat action, but as I said before, it was intended as a ground attacker, mainly because it had some serious gun power. It had 5 12.7mm machine guns, so 4 front and 1 rear. So this thing was going to be a pretty heavy ground pounder with guns, but it wasn't intended for anything else. And as I said, it did have a bomber variant, but they didn't actually make any, so I don't know specifications on what bombs it would carry. And last but not least, the Capone AP-1. Based off the CA-301 fighter, this was a twin-seater attack plane with a more powerful Alfa Romeo radial engine. It saw some action during the Spanish Civil War, but underperformed terribly due to it being very heavy, very clumsy, and just not that great. It had 2 7.7mm and 1 12.7mm gun, and carried 500 kilograms of bombs. So that is the attackers. As I said, that's really all I can think of for the ground attack purposes for the low tiers of the Italian line. Yeah, makes it pretty tricky. Basically, there was no planes that carried rockets or anything like that in the Italian trees. So once Italian tanks come, it might be a bit tricky. And I'm pretty sure Italian tanks are going to come. So let us move on to the most important part of today. The bit we're all looking forward to. Okay, the bit I'm looking forward to. Bombers. Yes. Okay, so this part I am super excited for. Pre-World War II, Italy had some of the best bombers in the world, along with the most experience in bombing with planes. Latterly, during that period, it was considered one of the best nations for bomber aircraft. It is why many scratch their head as to why their World War II bombers were so piss poor. But I feel what Italy lacked in attackers and heavy fighters, they will make up for in fighters and bombers for their tech trees. Although historically they didn't do great, the Italian fighters and the Italian bombers were some of the best around, and there were some fantastic options in there. Okie dokie. Let us start off with the Cansa, C-A-N-S-A, FC. I had to read my own notes there just in case I was doubling up for a second. Now this could fall into a heavy fighter or even ground attacker, but it was also a light bomber. It did not reach its full potential due to the armistice during 1943, because it was made later on, so it really didn't get much in the area. Now this one had a single nose-mounted 37mm gun, 2 12.7mm turrets, and 1 12.7mm gun at the back. Well, I think it was underneath actually, towards the tail section. Carried up to 400 pounds of bombs. I honestly could see this being a light bomber, possibly a ground attacker, but not sure yet, so I've put it in bomber area just for that. But with that 37mm, it's probably going to get put into attacker aircraft more than ground attackers. It's more than bombers, sorry. Although it is more of a bomber than a ground attacker. It's just, as I said, it's a bit weird with the Italian planes. Next up was the one, there are two that I'm looking forward to, and this is definitely one of them. The Cant, C-A-N-T, Z1007 Kingfisher. Now, this is a sleek, free-engined bomber, and many consider it to be the best Italian bomber of the Second World War, if not one of the best medium bombers of the Second World War. It had great stability and flying characteristics, and it just looks stunning. Many say this was more a tri-engine fighter than a bomber because it was so nimble and sleek. This thing was just fantastic. It could actually dogfight. It was awesome. It was a fantastic plane. It was very slimline, very good at its job, and it could have been a real big problem if they had got enough of these made and had the crews to fly them. So, what have we got for the armour and armaments and stuff? So you could carry 2,200 kilograms of bombs, or twin torpedoes. Yep, this thing could be a very dangerous thing in naval battles. It had two 12.7mm machine guns and two 7.7mm machine guns. Now you can see in the schematics here that the top turret has the two guns on it. You also have the side gun, and then there's a gun below it as well. So yeah, this could be a fun little plane to play, especially for bomber pilots. A bomber that can outmatch some fighters, especially heavy fighters, in turning. So back onto some more mundane planes. The Caproni CA-135, rather conventional looking medium bomber. The 135 was a good workhorse, but it did not have any spectacular service. Carried 16,000 kilograms, it's not 16, 1,600 kilograms of bombs. Could carry up to two torpedoes as well. Two 12.7mm turrets, in the turret, sorry, and two 7.7mm in the belly and the nose. It's pretty much just a sort of medium light bomber, similar to that of the Halifax, just not as heavily armed or capable of carrying as many bombs. Next we come up to a bit of the workhorse, the Fiat BR-20 Stork. The first all-metal Italian bomber in 1936, this plane had a long career ending in 1945. It was used to great success in the Spanish Civil War and the Second Sino-Japanese War, and when World War II started, it was the backbone of Italy's bomber efforts. It carried 1,600 kilograms of bombs, had three 12.7mm machine guns, two in the turret, one in the nose. So yeah, this one is pretty much a workhorse. This is going to be probably 3.0, I'd say. Something around there. It's a bit like a Betty. Not as heavily armed, but it actually led to the Japanese creating their own bombers off of it. They did copy some of the characteristics of it from its time in Japan for that war. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting plane, and it's going to be one of the better bombers out there. Not for payload, but it's going to be a good stable bomber, and it's going to be a good plane to learn to bomb in. Okay guys, last but not least, we have the Pergio P108 Bombardier. Yes, the Italian B-17. This thing is a beast. Oh, am I happy this thing is going to hopefully come to game. This is a plane that should be in game for sure. Now, there weren't huge amounts of these in the war, but there was enough. If the Condor is in the game, then this needs to be in the game. So this was an Italian 4-engine heavy bomber. This aircraft is close as you will get to an Italian B-17, and is similar to that of the Focke-Wulf 200 Condor. However, what interests me is the anti-ship variant, which carried a 102mm gun inside the nose. Just let that sink in for a second. A plane with a 102mm gun. We've got the PBJ with the 75mm, I think, at the moment. That thing is ridiculous. Imagine 102mm. That thing is silly. Best of all, it could carry up to 70, I think it was 75 rounds of ammunition for it. Yeah. Yep. I want that. I want that plane. I want that gun. I want a tank in the sky. It's going to be silly. The gun was fully aimable, and it had a zoom lens on it. So it's basically flying a tank in the sky, sniping people. It could be very, very fun to play in ground battle. That's all I'm saying. It was also designed to hunt destroyers. Yeah, just saying that while we're seeing we're getting destroyers in the game. Anyway, the bomber was reasonable with twin turrets on the wings. Another thing about this plane, it had turrets on the wings, either side of the plane. It was on its outermost wing, so on the fourth and first engines, and it had twin 12.7mm machine guns in it. It also had a retractable belly turret, along with a nose-mounted gun. So all in all, it had 5 12.7mm and 2 7.7mm guns. It was capable of carrying 3,500 kilograms of bombs, or 2 torpedoes. It also could carry 2 torpedoes and a 102mm gun in the nose. Yeah, I want this plane for ships. I really do. This thing is going to be the troll of the sky. Yeah, it's just silly. It's just silly. The reason that the 102mm plane never really saw action is because, well, anti-aircraft fire was getting better. Simple as that. So Germany developed the guided bombs, basically ground surface to ship missiles. They developed them by the time this plane was being put into action, and they went, look, it's cheaper to shoot stuff with a bomb. Also, each shell cost more than the bomb itself, so that's another part of it. Each one of those 102mm shells cost more than a bomb. I really want this plane. So anyway, that is enough of me splooging over this plane. And that is enough of a speculation for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please comment below on what you think they may add to the game. And, well, if you liked this list, I'd love to hear from you guys. Okay guys, have a great day and I'll catch you again soon. This is Screezilla out. Bye bye.